You're listening to the Back Home Network, presented by Home Field Apparel. And welcome, Hoosier fans, to this week's edition of Assembly Call Radio, where each week we discuss the most important topics in the world of Indiana basketball. This is our 263rd edition of Assembly Call Radio and our 864th episode of the Assembly Call. We're catching up to Crimson Cast. Recorded on the evening of September 8th, 2022. I am your host, Jared Morris. And let's begin this edition of the Assembly Call how we begin every edition of the Assembly Call, and that is with our Hoosier Proud banner moment.
And Indiana is the national champion.
When it comes down, Indiana will be champion.
Smart takes the shot.
The Hoosiers have won the national championship.
Well, after years of preseason prognostications that have been decidedly and deservedly moribund, this year's prognostications are getting progressively better. Blue Ribbon revealed that IU is their 12th ranked team and the highest ranked Big Ten team. Joe Lunardi revealed that he has IU as a 3 seed, and that is the highest Big Ten team on his preseason seed list. And Lindy's released its Midwest cover with Xavier Johnson on it that lists Indiana as the number 6 team in the country. That's right, not number 6 in the Big Ten, number 6 in the country. Now look, obviously these preseason prognostications don't mean anything in and of themselves. They're just meant to drive clicks and magazine sales and give obsessive podcasters something to talk about in the offseason. But as we've noted many times before on this show, the preseason predictions are actually right more often than not. Not always, but more often than not, when it comes to who the best handful of teams in the country are going to be, give or take a few. And right now, Indiana is being grouped in that handful. And part of getting Indiana basketball back, quote unquote, to where we all want it to be, is getting used to these lofty preseason predictions, which means the team is routinely backing them up once the season begins. So, may this be the first of many off seasons to come in which Indiana is back to being mentioned among the top rungs of the sport and then actually goes out and proves all the prognosticators right. All right, well, let me now introduce my co-host for this week. Coach Tonsoni is off, but we have a full house, and we will begin to my right.
Analyzing players, finding every wrinkle. He hasn't ever hosted, never lifted a finger. He's got all the
Well, let me quickly add just one thing about this.
Dude just interrupted his own jingle.
That's right, ladies and gentlemen, taking a break from covering the NFL season opener for us here on the Assembly Call. That's how much he loves the Assembly Call and IU basketball. It's Ryan Phillips. Ryan, what do you have to rant or ruminate about this week?
Honestly, I'm a little surprised. You never go to me first, so I'm thrown.
I thought you had stuff to do. I was trying.
I do got to pop off.
Magnanimous.
Listen, everybody watching, I will be back, but I got to pop off after this. What I want to do is the schedule has come out. We're going to talk about that in segment 2, but I want to plant my flag on something, and that's the meetup, the Assembly Call meetup that we will be doing again this year. I have planted my flag on a date, and you guys can either show up or not. And we try and do it on a Big Ten game on a Saturday because we figure we'll come in Friday night, hang out with everybody, do Saturday, do the post-game show, and then everybody can fly out on Sunday. But also, on a Saturday, people can hang around a little longer, as opposed to Sunday. You got to get back for work on Monday. So we got to do a Saturday weekend game in the Big Ten. There's one on the schedule that stands out to me. Schedule-wise, it's really easy for me if it's not on an NFL playoff weekend because I have to work. So we're looking right now, the week before the Super Bowl would be February 4th, and Indiana happens to be playing a little team from up north called Purdue. And quite frankly, I think that's the game that everybody wants to be back for because this is the year that Indiana is projected to be better than Purdue for once. I think we're looking, it looks beatdown worthy, and I want to be there for that. So I will be there February 4th. You guys, I'll carry the Assembly Call banner. You guys want to come, just come on, and I'll see you all there. That's what I think. You guys can do what you want with that. I want to be there February 4th against Purdue.
So if we don't show up, you're going to host the meetup and everything.
No, there just won't
Do it
be a show. You guys can do a show online, and I'll just drink. Like, well, I mean,
You'll just be there holding the banner.
Who said anything about a
by
show?
yourself.
I mean, last year I just walked into Switchyard, and you guys were up on a stage, and I was like, "Oh, give me a headset." You know, it's so no. But I think that would be the perfect weekend to do it. We will figure it out with schedules and everything, but. I think going for a Purdue game, we've done it before. We need to redeem that Purdue game we went for, I think. And I think that's the perfect weekend to do it. I'd love to hear what the audience thinks and what the rest of you guys think. So, yeah, I think that's the one to do.
I will say early, we haven't had any formal discussions about this, but it's probably the early leader in the clubhouse. I would say that. We still have to look at the schedule and talk things out, but it is an early leader in the clubhouse for sure. And the schedule does shape up for a lot of options, whereas last year we basically had no options except for one, which is when we ended up doing it. There may be more options. By the way, we have breaking news here on the assembly call, and it is no small matter.
It's a big freaking deal.
Megan Mahaffey is in the live chat, ladies and gentlemen. Haven't seen Megan in a while. It's always good to see her. One of our first listeners. We always make a big deal when Megan is here.
Everybody,
you,
I will be back, by the way. I'll be back. Don't worry. I'm not running away.
That's a threat. That is a threat. Okay, let's continue going around the horn here with some opening comments. And we'll go this direction.
The best of you sports coaching, you know that we got 'em. When it comes to analytic trends, you know he can spot 'em. For first-class bracketology, if you want the top, you gotta go bottoms. If you want the top, you gotta go bottoms.
That's right.
If you want the top,
Does Joe Lenardi have his own theme music? I don't think so. It's Andy Bottoms, ladies and gentlemen. The Sean McDermott of Girls U Sports Coaching in Cincinnati. President Emeritus of the Robert Johnson Fan Club. Andy, what's your bottoms line on the last week in IU basketball?
I mean, he might have his own theme music, but it's not by the great Bob Thompson, so it doesn't really matter.
That's right. It doesn't count.
Yeah, I'm sure he does. I'm sure they've worked something up for him, but we know it's not as good.
Ryan Tui says Joe Lenardi does. It's yakety sax.
Nice.
Hey, Joe Lenardi said nice stuff about IU this week. We should be kind.
This is true.
He was
now excited that the Big Ten schedule's out. I think everybody knew coming in IU's was going to be fairly tough, at least when you looked at who they had single plays against versus maybe some of the other teams. But yeah, certainly will make for some interesting discussion tonight. The what has become annual game against Nebraska in December, right back on the docket. So got that to look forward to, and but excited to break it down. I think the first game, or at least the first exhibition game, might be exactly 2 months from today. I could be wrong about that, but I think I'm in the ballpark.
Check John Rothstein's Twitter account to get the exact.
No, that's
the exact day.
I will not do that. But thank you. Actually, I think it was 2 months from yesterday. The first game is the Monday the 7th. So I was close, but exciting. The season's getting close, and like you said, a lot of good publicity in the off season. We'll hope that it amounts to something. But I suppose, as you said, better to be getting positive projections as opposed to poor or no projections at all.
All right. And joining us tonight, our special guests, our Back Home Network brethren from Crimson Cast, fresh off a victorious episode of Crimson Cast after the IU-Illinois game. He is our recruiting and name pronunciation correspondent. It is Scott Caulfield. Scott, your opening thoughts. If you want to talk football, man, talk football. We can still bask in the glow of a Big Ten victory. This is IU. There's no statute of limitations on how long we can talk about it. Football, basketball, what's on your mind, man? Good to have you.
Thank you, man. Do you have the sound of half your listeners being like, oh, I thought it was Galen. Come on, this is bunk. I'm turning off for 20 seconds. There we go. Yes. Suck it, fans. You get me. No, I was thinking that if you take so you're the preseason rankings for Blue Ribbon, Joe Lenardi, if you figure a 3 seeds like 12th ranked in the country, and Lindy, that adds up to 30. You take that times 2, that's still more, like IU football still is ranked higher than that. So we're in a good spot for IU basketball. IU football, man, 1-0. Illinois, probably easily on our way to 2-0, looking at 3-0. Hopefully basketball will be there too. No, it's fun to be ranked again. It's fun to be in the preseason discussions. And I think given the schedule outside of that little spot in the non-conference, we should be ranked most of the year. But you can see that, we're getting with it comes also the tougher, feels like the tougher schedule. But no, it's a great place to start. And, unlike most years where we haven't been ranked, it's good. So it's all good.
It's a constant, never-ending kick in the testicles.
That's football. That's definitely football. That'll be coming in November and October and November for football. Just wait.
I wonder what he was talking about when he said that. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if he was talking football or something
100%
basketball related.
football.
It was definitely during the Archie Miller era, so it very well may have been
100% football.
I mean,
related.
could have been basketball. Yeah, the worst part is that you can't really tell what it's specifically pertaining to because you could think of multiple options.
It's sad that we've been podcasting long enough that it could be for probably 4 different head coaches across 2 different sports. Like, I'm not sure.
Oh, that is very true. All right, well, here's what we have in store this week. We do have a few Hoosier headlines, so we will hit those. And then in segment 2, we will do a deeper dive, certainly than is warranted for the schedule release, but it is the offseason. And look, it's kind of fun just to see how these games line up and see what that may mean. And then in segment 3, as we always do, we will answer your questions. All of that coming this week on Assembly Call Radio. But first, let's talk about our presenting sponsor.
Home field apparel, wear one for the team.
Yes, this edition of Assembly Call Radio, just like all shows on the Back Home Network, including Crimson Cast, is presented by our friends at Home Field Apparel, where they have the largest collection of vintage IU apparel that you will find anywhere with beloved logos, like 2 different versions of the Bison. And look, the weather is starting to turn. Football is starting. You need to make sure that your winter wardrobe is ready to go. And I speak on behalf of all of our hosts and probably everybody who has ordered from Home Field Apparel that you absolutely need the hoodies and the crew neck sweaters for the winter. And I'm not just talking about like 1 or 2. Like, you really need 1 of each for every day. That would be 14 garments. But that way, you have options for each day. If something gets dirty, if you have children and they spit up or they spill on you, you have options. And you want to have options. And at Home Field Apparel, you have tons of them. Because not only do they have those for Indiana, but they have them for 140, 150 other schools. Right now, they're releasing shirts every day commemorating a different national champion. They've always got something fun going on. If you're a Colts fan, they've got a Colts line. So Home Field Apparel, they just continue expanding. Their materials do great in the wash. The colors stay, alive and fresh and popping. And I mean, even better than that, Connor and the team, they're IU grads. The whole thing started because of their love of Indiana sports in the state of Indiana. And now they've grown into this national behemoth that is just going to take over college sports apparel. But they've got humble roots. It's a great company. They've supported us for a long time, and we love supporting them. So go to homefieldapparel.com. Use our promo code HOME to get 15% off your first order. That's promo code HOME for 15% off, assuming that Coach and Scott and Galen leave something for you, because between the 3 of them, they've probably ordered everything. So yes, go to Home Field Apparel. Wear one for the team. Okay, guys, let's roll through a few headlines. I mentioned Lindy's has Indiana ranked number 6, which is awesome. I think we're all excited about that, but recognize, what it means and what it doesn't. More importantly, let's talk a little recruiting. Scott, your favorite topic. We did get an update today on Arrington Page, who is really kind of the hottest iron Indiana has in the fire right now. Obviously some guys like Jamie Kaiser and others that Indiana was going after chose to go to different schools. Arrington Page from Georgia is, one guy that Indiana has been in hot and heavy pursuit of and would really, complete a nice trio of a class with Ja'Kai Newton and Gabe Cupps. Well, the latest update from Eric Bossi, there's kind of a question now, is he a package deal with Isaiah Collier? If he is, and that's a guy that he has played with obviously previously, a good friend. If he is, then it looks like USC or Cincinnati is in the lead because they are the top candidates for Collier. Indiana is not recruiting him. But here's what Bossi says after that. He says, Indiana, Miami, and Missouri are also in the mix, and Page has seen all of them as well. Of that group, the behind-the-scenes intel suggests that Indiana is in the best position. With Collier, the prevailing thought as of today is that USC may be edging ahead of the pack, and from the sounds of it, from the sounds of it, all involved with Page do worry about the Trojans. Still, this one seems to be a little too close to call the Trojans the outright favorites just yet, and it wouldn't be a surprise if Page picked the Bearcats or the Hoosiers. So maybe. And, really this is one I think a lot of IU fans had kind of felt was leaning in our direction, and that maybe the momentum is fading on it a little bit. We'll wait and see. There were reports. I think Mike Schumann from the Daily Hoosier reported that Indiana staff was out to meet Page recently. So we'll see. Scott, your reaction on the importance of the Arrington Page recruitment and what you make of this latest report, if anything.
Sounds good. I look forward to seeing him in Indiana jersey in the fall. And can he shoot threes? He's
not a 3-point shooter. He's a springy big guy who will probably take a few years to develop, but he's a really good program player that the staff obviously likes and wants a lot.
Yeah, you're asking the wrong guy. I mean, I know. I will
That's
keep
why
up
I asked
with
you for the honor.
Yeah, the only thing I have to say of recruiting is I went to a Pacers game last year against the Cavs and watched Darius Garland drop like 45 on the Pacers, and it's like, damn, I wish you would have. I remember. This is why I hate recruiting. I'll let you go. Take a shot, everybody, because I remember like the stories of like him and Romeo. I think like standing in front of the banners. It's like the story was like, we're gonna play here together, and it's like Garland and Romeo. It's like, oh, this is gonna be great. Like that's awesome. And then it's like, hey, we're going to Vanderbilt, and then he's tearing up the NBA. So that was awesome. I enjoyed that. He can join the Josh Smith All-Stars. I will wait and see him in a Hoosier jersey or a USC jersey when he plays in Assembly Hall. So, yes.
Hey, Josh Smith is always part of the IU family. Do not lump in somebody who didn't commit to this university first, okay? Come on.
Yes, my bad.
Hey, look, those NBA-style practices of Bryce Drew, I mean, they clearly prepared Darius Garland for the NBA because he's a badass.
6 games.
So, Andy, your thoughts on this? I mean, it's one of those things. It's like I kind of feel like the way recruiting goes now it's like a 365-day-a-year thing. We get so caught up in the ebbs and flows, and really, I just want to get to November and see what our roster is. And then get to next November and see what our roster is, because I'm starting to get a little exhausted by it all, honestly.
Come to my
I think it's one of those. You haven't really I don't feel like you've heard as much about the package deal with the two guys being, linked and only going to the same school for a while. So that's glad to see that coming back. But yeah, I do think it's just some of the ebbs and flows of it as you go. If IU goes and meets with them, the tea leaves then may suggest something else, and it swings back a little bit the other way. So it's all just kind of a wait and see approach as you figure out who they're really zeroing in on. And I think with the transfer portal and all those things, it probably is easier not to get super caught up in a particular recruitment or the fact that they may or may not get a certain guy, because the transfer portal, for better or worse, gives you additional options to fill that spot if you don't end up getting the recruit that you want.
Ryan, is it a disaster if Indiana does not land Arrington Page?
No, I wouldn't say it's a disaster, especially because they got Malik Renault, which changed the landscape as far as front court recruiting when they did that. I still think this class I know the staff wasn't super in love with a lot of players in this class, but I also think that there were opportunities they had to add some really good players, and they kind of were late to the game on it. It's not a class where you look at and say, wow, they did a great job, top to bottom, bang up job, guys. It's kind of and you hope for the transfer portal. Now we've talked about this. We talked about this a couple weeks ago, that the transfer portal is going to be loaded this year, absolutely loaded with talent. And people have been talking about that since last April, that this coming transfer portal class will be big, and will be not just big as far as the number, but big as far as the talent available. And so you can lean on that, I guess. But I still think the bread and butter of your program has to be that high school recruiting and creating those pipelines. And I think that's what the best teams do. And then they fill out their roster with transfers, as opposed to making that, we need to get a bunch of transfers to fill all these holes. I mean, there are possibilities you're losing. If all goes well, if you have a great season, you might lose 4 starters next year, maybe 5. That chance exists. Not saying it's likely, but that chance exists. And so you can have a good season, but we saw in the Tom Crean era, if you're replacing all of your most important pieces, you're taking a massive step back, no matter how good the pieces you're replacing them with are, because continuity is a thing in college basketball. And so that's why every year you see like Kentucky will lose a shocking game early in the year. Why? They're more talented than the other team. Well, yeah, but those guys haven't played together before. You'll see Duke do that. You see, and they're having loads of 5-star talent. Indiana doesn't do that. And so I just think that you've got to be able to have waves of talent coming on the roster as opposed to clean slating things every year. And I feel like some teams are doing that now, and I don't think it leads to championships. And so I think if your goal in Indiana is to win championships, you fill out your roster maybe with transfers, but the backbone of your program has to be good recruiting classes year in and year out. And I think that this staff just needs to get to a point where they have those backbone 3 guys every year, and then you add talent around them.
Also saw a report from Jake Weingarten of Stock Risers that Indiana's full staff, led by Mike Woodson, will be in tomorrow, that's Friday, for 5-star 2025 prospect Jalen Harrelson. And so, look, you have limited resources when you're recruiting. And so Indiana didn't put as much toward 2023, but they've invested a ton in some of these young guys coming up in 2025, like Harrelson and Sisley. And so as time passes, we will see if those efforts bear fruit. A couple other interesting notes. DJ White and the great Don Fisher will be inducted into the IU Athletics Hall of Fame. Very well deserved for both of them. DJ White remains one of the most underrated and just uber productive big men that has ever played at Indiana. Just, kind of his career was kind of at a weird time, an odd time, but he was such a good player. And Don Fisher has been the voice of Indiana sports for so many of us for so long.
How is he not already in?
I don't know.
I think that was the general reaction of everyone. I was shocked by that.
Are they inducting him for something else other than broadcasting? Like he's already in for broadcasting?
Or like naming the Hall of Fame after him? Like the Don Fisher IU Athletics Hall of Fame?
Yeah.
Scott, your thoughts on the inductions of DJ White and Don Fisher?
I'm also with you on I thought Fisher was in. It's wild when they will do the, pre-game, hype video for the players. And it's like, they'll show clips from the 76 title game. And it's like, black and white footage. It's like, but Don Fisher is still doing the call. Yeah. I'll also say that I think Andrea Benson, Kent Benson's daughter, is also in. It's going to be the first father-daughter or father-son combo in the Hall of Fame as well. But yeah, I mean, DJ White has a great spot in IU history. I think the last IU basketball player to be on the cover of Sports Illustrated. I know he and him and the guy from Illinois at the time were on the cover, a regional cover of Sports Illustrated.
He was the last Big Ten Player of the Year.
Yes, SI covers more.
He is not. I actually have Sports Illustrated covers over here.
That's right.
Yeah. Zeller was on one, and Oladipo was on one before the tournament.
Yes, thank you.
But he was the first one.
Scott just got sunned by Andy Bottoms.
After Damon. Well, yeah. Well, if I didn't have these up on the wall in here, perhaps I wouldn't know. But yeah, I think it went from.
I would have gotten away with it if it wasn't for you damn kids,
damn posters.
I think it went from Damon Bailey after the one Kentucky game all the way to DJ White. Though it had been a while. I don't know that there was anybody in between those couple, but.
It had been a while. Well, Inside Indiana also had a cover. I'm going to try and start naming other magazines maybe you don't have on your walls. But no, it's great. No, the Fisher one it's amazing. It's 50 years. He's still, as all of us, being amateur broadcasters, he's still really good. I mean, he's still really good at what he does. So it'll be it's always a fun time. And, that's a reason to come back for the football game because they always bring those inductees out onto the field. And so that'll be nice to see Fisher out there and DJ White. But yeah.
Going to drop a name here. So in 2012, I was in Milwaukee and I met with the Padres broadcasters at a bar after one of the games. And one of them was Dick Enberg, who has a degree from IU. And we were just sitting there talking, and I asked him, I was like, well, what was your dream job? Because he'd done everything, and is there any job you haven't done that you wanted? And he said, I wanted to be the Indiana basketball broadcaster. And then he looked at me and he paused and looked at me and said, but Don Fisher refuses to quit. And so not retire, quit. And so so Don Fisher, Dick Enberg has now departed us, but Don outlasted Dick gunning for his job for all those years.
Andy, any prevailing? Oh, by the way, DJ White also was just announced today. He's going to be a video analyst for Oklahoma City. His professional playing career ended. He retired a couple of weeks ago, or announced his retirement a couple weeks ago, and now he's going to be a video analyst for the Oklahoma City Thunder, where he played his NBA years, most of them, if not all of them, with Oklahoma City. Do you have
Real quick, shout out to the chat, Bob. I was wrong. It's Ashley Benson, not Andrea Benson. I knew both of them actually working at the YMCA, and I knew Andrea Benson, also a daughter of Kent Benson. So I apologize for that. It's Ashley Benson. So my bad.
Andy, your favorite Don Fisher call and prevailing memory of DJ White? Putting you on the spot
at the same time.
No, you can separate them.
Oh, okay.
Your favorite Don Fisher call of DJ White? Yes.
I mean, geez, that's really, really obscure. I don't know. I guess I'll say for me, it's either the Keith Smart shot or the Watt shot. I guess I'll say the Watt shot, if only because I actually was listening to Don Fisher on that, because I wasn't able to watch the game versus I was watching the '87 championship game and obviously heard the call after the fact, but at least one that was there. I think I joked that was the show that you did by yourself for a while, but I joked I was listening to it on my phone and there was such a delay that my wife called to tell me that they had won, and I basically said, well, I need to hang up with you so I can listen to Don Fisher call it. So I guess that automatically makes that the one. I think of DJ White, just some of the battles with Pruitt was on that cover, but also I think that was I want to say that was maybe the Terrence Dials era at Ohio State. Just there was a big guy at Ohio State that I feel like he kind of went back and forth with a bit. Just steady, kind of from the moment he was on campus, was a guy that you could rely on, good rebounder, persevered through some of the foot injuries and things like that to come back, and was a really good part of the Sampson team there toward the end of his career. But always just steady, a guy we talk a lot of times now about how many guys do you have that you know what you're going to get out of on any given night, and he was a guy that you pretty much knew what you were going to get from on any given night.
The closest thing to Alan Henderson since Alan Henderson left Indiana.
Underrated.
Ryan has a story.
Underrated Don Fisher call, by the way, was Indiana's comeback and win over Michigan to win the outright Big Ten title.
Yes,
with Zeller and those guys. The year they won, was that 2013?
13.
Yeah, that is a great. If you go back and watch that game, that last 5 minutes is Don Fisher at his absolute best. Obviously, Watt shot, Keith Smart. Those are all the classic ones, but that's an underrated one. The DJ White story is, well, first of all, I will say if DJ White doesn't break his foot, I don't think Mike Davis loses his job in 2005, 2006. That team does well enough that Mike Davis keeps his job. I think he missed all but I think one game that season. I'm not sure if it was a preseason game or if it was a regular season game, but he played. And then I remember when they played Duke at home, if they had DJ White, they would have beat him, I think, unquestionably. But as a freshman, DJ had a class in Ballantyne. And I know this because I almost killed him running down the stairs. He was wearing his McDonald's All-America jacket. I had to drop a paper off, and I'm running down those big stairs at Ballantyne as fast as I can to get to my next class. And DJ was on the wrong side. You know how people on the right, you stay to the right. Like that's it. DJ could do whatever he wanted. He didn't have to do that. He was a 5-star freshman All-American. He could go wherever he wanted, and he turns the corner and a jackass almost runs right into him and knocks him down the stairs. He would have been out for the season because just the way it was positioned. But luckily I stopped myself, and he said, "Oh, excuse me." I'm like, no, excuse me, DJ, you please. Stairs are yours.
It's a really odd way to flex your McDonald's All-American status, or just walk up the wrong side on a stairwell.
And he had the jacket. He was wearing his McDonald's All-American jacket too. That was the thing. I was like, because I came face to face with the McDonald's logo. I was like, I know exactly who that is without even looking up. And it was DJ White. So, but hey, you know what? No harm, no foul. He lived, he survived. He got injured the next year. So it wasn't my fault.
Okay. Last notes here before we wrap up this segment. This weekend will be the final Tonsoni tailgate. The great coach, Tonsoni, not here this week. but he is going to stop it. Obviously, you all know about some of the health concerns that he had, and for that and other reasons, he is stopping his weekly tailgate. He's still going to be there, and he'll give us the details. He's still going to have meetups and be at games. He's just stopping the tailgate. But this is going to be the last one. And so if you have a chance to get out there, go check out Coach Tonsoni. I think there may be some special guests rolling up there. And if you need to know where that tailgate is, just send us a tweet at Assembly Call or shoot me an email, jared@assemblycall.com, and I can send you the map where they meet up. And one last programming note, next week on Doing the Work, Jeff and Kathy will be talking with Amanda Foster, who is covering IU women's basketball for Inside the Hall this year. That's right, the most trusted and reliable source for IU sports news or IU basketball news, Inside the Hall, adding a little IU women's basketball to their mix this year, which is awesome to see. That IU women's basketball team, man, they were just irrepressible, just forcing their way into places where they should be anyway. And so Amanda Foster will be on with the Doing the Work crew next week. Okay, coming up on Assembly Call Radio, it is time to talk schedule. We finally got the actual release of the Big Ten schedule, the order, the date of that, and tell you what kind of draw Indiana got. Coming up on the Assembly Calls. Stick with us. Sorry, Scott, I did not see your note until after we already did that. But you can ask now because we break live.
Yeah, I know. The question would be, how many color commentators has Fish had in his career as a basketball analyst?
I mean, he's had like 7 since I was at school. No, he's had like 4, I think.
Yeah, I'm just thinking randomly, the Queen was around for 12 presidents or something, 14. Yeah, is over under.
May she rest
14?
in peace.
Yes, of course. God love the Queen. Have there been 14 more color analysts in basketball and football?
It's
You
sort of
added
like
football a ton.
It's like we talked about this at the Big Lead. How many co-hosts has Stephen A. Smith had over the years at ESPN? It's like he's the constant, and everybody it's like a turnstile of people since Skip Bayless.
Well, it's the Dick Enberg story is funny because Jeremy Gray was right after me and Galen in school, and my thought was always he's going to be he'll take Don Fisher's job, and then it's he's doing women's games, he's doing everything, and then it's now he aged out. He aged out while waiting for Fisher to retire. It's now he's missed that opportunity.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
Don Fisher reminds me of when there's a king of a country and he's king so long that his grandkids inherit the throne, not his son. He's just aging everybody out.
Not to bring Queen Elizabeth back in, but it's Prince Charles must have been all right, I'm 41, I'm gonna get to be king pretty soon, and now it's hey, I get to be king for 3 years before I'm done.
I'm gonna have 40 years as king.
It's no, I'm gonna be 78, and it's all the good king years are out the drain.
All right, so I got to go bounce out of here for a little bit. Andy, I'll do the intro for the next segment and then hand it over to you, and I'll bounce out. If anything goes haywire, just shoot me a text because I'll have the window up, although I'll remove myself.
Okay, that's fine. I'm gonna assume that I probably can't also play sounds through this to take us out of that break or not, right?
You should be able to, as long as you have a loopback working. Try and play a sound. Let's see if we hear it.
Well, I don't have any of those programs open, so just give me a second.
Oh, it's not a big deal if you don't.
Oh, they're just not open. It's not that I don't have them. So let me open.
I saw, Scott, there are 2 new episodes of Crimson Cast to listen to. You did an episode of Crimson Cash, and then Galen apparently did Tailgate Talk with a little football sprinkled in.
Yep.
So we'll look forward to listening. Lots of listening material for IU fans here in advance of the Idaho game.
I'm looking forward to the Tailgate Talk. I'm starting to do some tailgates this year too. My son wanted a tailgate. I actually had to call Galen and get some tips.
I would think that you would have just gotten them by osmosis over all these years of hosting a podcast with him.
Yeah, but it's I still want to make sure I'm doing the right thing. I'm definitely not competing with this tailgate. It's just me and my boys. But
all right, Jared, I got this.
Artist, that's for
I got this open, so I'm going to play something, and you tell me if it comes through. You hear anything or no?
No. Make sure that you have the right microphone selected in StreamYard. And if it doesn't work, it's not really a big deal.
All right, I'll try one thing, and then we can.
Yeah, try one thing.
See if it works.
Yeah, and Coach will be able to come stop by your tailgate, Scott.
Yes.
He'll be making the rounds at some other tailgates. So, which would be nice. And hopefully, that's the other thing we need to think about for the meetup. Yeah, but we can't really do that for the meetup, can we? I was going to say it'd be nice to do it for a football game, but it's too late in the year. Because then we'd have to do a non-Big Ten game, and we like to do Big Ten games.
Yeah.
Okay.
I do think for next season, we should see if we can do a fall, like maybe a football weekend and do a basketball preview show or something. I mean, we've talked about
that is not out of the question yet. That's not out of the question
it's just
yet.
so late because of the price of flights this year.
Well, that is
insane. True. So, I mean, if like next year we planned it in like April that we're going to do this weekend, and even if everybody can't make it, we do something to sort of plant our flag in the fall and in the spring. You guys are getting a great insight into what our personal conversations are like about this, but just to do it twice, I think twice a year is great. That, and we'll have to see what we do for this year because last year was great. It was so much fun.
It was awesome.
Yeah.
Andy, did you?
I tried to change it and then I was talking and you clearly couldn't hear me, so there must be something else going on. So I'm just not going to bother.
Don't worry about it. I'll play a song to get us into this, and then it's all good.
Okay.
All right. Here we go.
Hey guys, it's Gene Steratore, CBS officiating analyst and retired Big Ten basketball official. You know, I have never listened to the assembly call, and to be honest, I don't intend to. But if you listen, make sure you ignore anything Ryan says about officiating. He's really good from the seat of his pants, but I wouldn't trust him on the court with a whistle around his neck. Time has proven him wrong on virtually everything. Take care. We'll talk soon.
Ryan's here, opening night of the NFL season. It's got to be the Gene Steratore opening. I'm Jared Morris here with Scott Caulfield, Brian Phillips, Andy Bottoms. It is time to dive into schedule talk as the Big Ten schedule was released. There have been a lot of hot sports opinions on Twitter about this, and apparently Indiana got a very tough draw. And so I'm going to leave you three gentlemen to talk about this because I actually have to bounce here for a little while, and if I can make it back on before the end of the show, I will. But you are all in very capable hands here. Andy, I will turn things over to you to talk about the schedule.
All right. Well, so the Big Ten schedule, as Jared mentioned, came out today. They had previously released the single plays and double plays, so I think everybody already had a pretty good sense of the challenges that IU would face. Obviously not the order of the games, which I think is probably where people are maybe now more attuned to the fact that things may be more difficult than they originally thought. But figured we would just kind of go through this in pieces here as we look through it. And to do that, the first is we now have these, I'm not sure for how many seasons in a row it is, these couple Big Ten games in early December to look at, which are always tricky. And interestingly enough for IU this year, they come in a really an already difficult period of the schedule. So we'll kind of give the games coming right before and right after it. So they play North Carolina on Wednesday, November 30th, and then the two Big Ten games are sandwiched after that. The first of those comes on December 3rd, which is a Saturday where they travel to Rutgers, to the RAC, I'm not going to acknowledge whatever it's called now. It will always be the RAC to me. And then December 7th on Wednesday, they play Nebraska. I know on Mind Your Banners, the Zach and Dustin joked that it seemed like Nebraska was an annual December game, whether it be in Bloomington or in Lincoln. And so that happens again. And then from there, IU travels the following Saturday to Las Vegas to play Arizona. And then the Saturday after that, they play at Kansas. So a pretty tough 5-game stretch there. But Scott, as you look at these, first couple Big Ten games, there's always, one home, one road. So you're not going to get any breaks that way. But is this a favorable start to the Big Ten schedule for IU, or do you automatically go into it and feel like, well, if we can just get out of this 1-1, I'd feel okay?
I mean, if we're looking to win the Big Ten or really compete, you got to go 2-0 in those games. It is funny, you mentioned it's like we always play Nebraska there. It does always seem like we play a version of like Nebraska, Penn State, Rutgers, or Minnesota there. Like I can't ever remember a time like we're playing Illinois, Michigan, or Michigan State or Purdue as one of our 2 December games. It feels like everybody kind of plays like the middle of the bottom of the Big Ten at that point. Unless you're Michigan, go look at Michigan's schedule. They only play 1 game in December. They're playing Minnesota, and then they don't play Maryland until January 1st. So I guess Michigan just doesn't have to do 2 of those games. But no, I think, again, as we talk about the expectations and we look at the rankings, with that comes a team where, Rutgers isn't going to be horrible. But if you think of the Big Ten as kind of like Indiana, Illinois, Michigan State, Michigan, maybe Purdue, maybe Iowa, none of the rankings, at least now, really have Rutgers or Nebraska in there. So those are 2 games you should win, especially in that stretch of 5 games. You probably need to go 3-2. You got to get at least one, hopefully 1, maybe 2 of those. So looking at those games specifically, I think, 2-0 is where you need to go from what we know now sitting in here, in the middle of September. I think what everybody's looking at is, I'll lead into it, like the end of the season. Although I do want to, I'll let someone else talk. I do want to hit on some of the other teams and their ends of season. It's interesting, but our end of the season wrap up where you go at Michigan, at Northwestern, home to Illinois, at Michigan State, at Purdue, home to Iowa, home to Michigan. That's a tough, 4 out of 5 on the road, 2 against Michigan, which it feels like those 2 might be possibly for the Big Ten title. So it's not relatively easy there. But I'll chime back in with some other schedules. But yeah, I mean, those are kind of the high level thoughts when I looked at it the first time.
Yeah, when you look at that stretch, Andy, early in the season, at Rutgers and Nebraska, it's not Rutgers and Nebraska that raises the alarm for me. It's you play North Carolina, and then a few days later you go to the RAC or wherever, and then you play Nebraska, okay. But then 3 days after that, you're playing Arizona in Vegas, and then a week later you're at Kansas. So it's not just those 2 games, it's everything surrounding it is the tough part, and that makes those games harder. If because you're not getting tough game break, you're getting tough game, then road conference game, then a game you have to win against Nebraska, then you go play Arizona, and then you play Kansas. So there's it's just a pattern of really tough games because look, as Scott said, if you want to win the Big Ten title, you got to win both of those conference games. And the non-conference, they don't matter as much as the conference games, but you figure of those 3 big games right there, UNC, Arizona, and Kansas, you've got to win at least 1 for sure. And then hopefully win 2 if you're trying to be a top 15, top 10 team. I think you think at Kansas is a loss because it's a true road game. If you're penciling things in, and then North Carolina is a home game, you've kind of got to win that. And then Arizona, neutral site, I guess, is a coin toss. But yeah, that's what makes those 2 games difficult for me is what's surrounding it. If that was just regular non-conference garbage that Indiana's had, there's no question those are winnable games you should take.
Yeah, the Rutgers one feels like good timing to play them. They'll still be in the early adjustment phase of the post-Ron Harper, Geo Baker era, so maybe better to play them early than late, but agree that feels like ones you really need to win if you want to contend for Big Ten title, given how tricky things get from there. So then as we move into January, and I was going to take this, I guess, month by month, although there's plenty of games in January, so maybe I'll break it down even more than that. For the duration of January, IU basically alternates home and road games. So they go at Iowa, Northwestern at home, at Penn State, Wisconsin at home, at Illinois, Michigan State at home, at Minnesota, and then they close the month with Ohio State at home and at Maryland. Relatively speaking, this is the part of the schedule where they really need to make some hay in terms of, I think if you put everything through the lens of you want to win the Big Ten, your home games in that month are Northwestern, Wisconsin, who's retooling a bit, Michigan State, who you've got Izzo, but I think there's question marks as there are with every Big Ten team in Ohio State. Like it feels to me that those are the kinds of home games that you need to win, and the road games, comparative to some of the ones you'll face later in the season at Iowa, it is difficult. Never really unclear what they're going to look like. Chris Murray played really well against IU last year, obviously, but what their team will look like is a bit of a question mark. At Penn State, one of the more winnable road games you'll get. You do go to Illinois in that scenario, at Minnesota, and then at Maryland. Again, teams that are projected to be toward the lower half of the league. So feels to me Scott, I'll throw this to you first before we get into that tough stretch that you reference. Like, this is one that IU's got to have a really, really strong Big Ten record in January based on the relative easiness, I guess, of those games, maybe compared to some others. Is that kind of how you interpret that, and maybe build some confidence heading into the tough stretch that they end with, or how do you kind of approach that part of the season?
No, I definitely would. I mean, this is, and I don't want to get into like, winning the Big Ten. I should say, getting a protected seed in the Big Ten tournament, getting a 4 seed would be nice. Finishing in the top 4. To do that, you're going to have to kind of have the bowl rolling downhill. You can't go into that back half of the schedule expecting to win. Real quick, I want to just, as we look at our non-conference in that rough stretch, and you talk about playing Michigan State on the 22nd, just if you haven't looked at Michigan State's non-conference, you talk about an insane schedule. So they open up against Northern Arizona. That's fine. Here's the rest of their schedule. They play Gonzaga. They play Kentucky. They play Villanova. They play Alabama in a tournament. Then they either going to play, I think, Oregon or Iowa State. And then they could play Villanova or North Carolina if they make it that far. And they play Notre Dame. And then they get into the Big Ten schedule with Northwestern, Penn State. So, I mean, Michigan State could legitimately be like 1-6, and we're not sure if they're good or not. But now, of course, we get them in that early January spot where maybe Izzo hasn't totally turned them around. But yeah, when you look at the back half, that from February 11th on, it gets really tough. Every home game, this was mentioned on Inside the Hall had this, and anybody with a calendar also can figure this out. All the home games in January are on weekends, which is kind of interesting. You don't get any of those kind of, the Purdue game last year was I think a Tuesday night. You get kind of fun crowds sometimes on weeknights. These are all weekend crowds. There's also good crowds, but you have weekend games. You kind of have that alternating home away, home away. You don't have back-to-back road games. You also don't have back-to-back home games. But yeah, you mentioned kind of the schedule there. And again, I think something we'll be thinking about a lot is, as IU fans, unfortunately, the last 5 or 6 years, we kind of look at it and be like, oh man, Penn State, we've had a tough time there in Iowa. That can be a tough place to play. And, we haven't had great luck against Northwestern at home. It's like, all right, if you're going to be top 4 in the Big Ten, then those are games you got to start winning a lot of those games. And I think as fans, that's something where you need to start looking at the schedule and being a little more positive. It's like, all right, Northwestern, Wisconsin, Michigan State, Ohio State, Purdue, and Rutgers all at home. You probably got to sweep those, or at least look at losing one of those, and the rest of those you got to win. And then those road games, like you mentioned, you're looking at Maryland, Minnesota, Illinois, Penn State, and Iowa. As I look at it, based on where the rankings are in the Big Ten now, Illinois is the only game that looks like it could be really tough. The rest of those should be winnable games. I'm not saying we're going to go 10-1, but I do think that as you look at this team, if you're going to be third, fourth, second in the Big Ten, you're going to have to be like 8-2. You don't just get to go, 500 and then suddenly, get to 4th spot in the Big Ten. So I do think we need to adjust our expectations on some of those games. But yeah, definitely January is where you're going to have to make some hay and look to, win the majority of those games.
And Ryan, I'll hop in here in a second. The other thing probably makes sense to call out before that is IU has, I think, 10 or 12 days off between, I think it's Kennesaw State. They play right before Christmas, and they don't play again until that Iowa game. So probably different schools of thought on whether a layoff that long is a positive or a potential negative. But I guess maybe with that as backdrop, Ryan, what are your thoughts on the January portion of the schedule?
Well, I mean, just in general, an overview, one thing I want to say is, and this isn't specific about any teams they're playing, but just kind of something that hit me is there's only 3 Sunday Big Ten games, which I think is good for the team because you get that Sunday off before you head into the week, and they don't have any Monday games. So you're getting 2 days off there essentially. And the other thing is no Friday night games in the Big Ten. And I know they were experimenting with that for a while, and Indiana gets none this year, which I think is a great thing. Play those Saturday, play the weekend. Don't play a Friday. I mean, if you can, avoid it. It gives you more time to recover between games. And I think it just gets you into a pattern where you're playing a weekday game, a weekend game, a weekday game, a weekend game. And that's, the Big Ten has tried to capitalize on, prime time during week, like a Friday or something a couple times, and it just hasn't worked. And the team doesn't play as well when it doesn't have that, typical schedule. You don't play. I mean, very rarely do college football teams play on a Thursday or Friday night. Very rarely. And there's a reason, they don't play their best. They want to get the best product. So I think only 3 Sunday games in conference and no Friday games. I think it's both of those a big positive for Indiana.
Yeah, it's interesting. It is a little bit more of a traditional, at least in January, more of, kind of the traditional Big Ten where it's either Thursday, Sunday or Wednesday, Saturday combos there, which give a little bit of rhythm to the season, which I think helps. They do end that final game on the last day of January is a Tuesday at Maryland, and then they get into a few more Tuesday games, a lot of Tuesday games actually as you get into February, but almost exclusively Tuesday, Saturdays in February versus what it is. So I think at least from a kind of getting yourself into a rhythm, I think there's some positivity there. So just running through February to this, and I know you've got to leave here in a minute, so I'll kind of run through the February schedule and then throw it to you for your final thoughts on this. But things start off as we talked about. Everything was alternating home and road. Start February with 2 home games, Purdue and Rutgers. Followed by 2 road games at Michigan, at Northwestern. Really, that at Michigan game starts a really tough stretch of games down to the end. They play 4 of the final 7 on the road. They are at Michigan, at Northwestern, Illinois at home, at Michigan State, at Purdue, Iowa, and Michigan. So if you figure most are projecting teams like Michigan, Purdue, Illinois, maybe Michigan State around the top of the league in most projections, the vast majority of your games in February are against teams that are in that mix. The only exceptions are really Rutgers at home, at Northwestern, and Iowa at home. As you look at those, everything else is against teams who you would project to be contenders, which essentially is why it feels so important to have a pretty gaudy Big Ten record coming out of January, because there are a lot of tough games there down the stretch. So, Scott, give us maybe a 3-game stretch that really may make or break things down that February run.
3-game stretch. Well, I mean, I was going to say the other thing too is we do have to remember that last year, I'm doing the numbers here in my head real quick. We went 4-8 to finish off the Big Ten schedule at the end of the year. So they didn't play their best basketball at the end of the Big Ten season. They definitely turned it on into the tournament. I'm not going to answer your question because I'm not sure I have an answer to it. But what I would say is, as I look at the other, our schedule is really tough. There's no doubt about that. When you look at like Michigan's schedule to end the year, when you look at us bookending with them, like they play, Indiana at home for Michigan. They're at Wisconsin, home to Michigan State, at Rutgers, Wisconsin, at Illinois, at Indiana. That's a pretty tough schedule for Michigan as well to finish off their season. But when you look at Illinois, their last few games are at Penn State, at Indiana, home Northwestern, at Ohio State, Michigan, and then at Purdue. That seems relatively easier. So you do wonder if like Illinois is going to have the easier path. And it's so hard in like September to look at this. Like I'm going off of, Bart Torvik's rankings of the Big Ten, and you're kind of going off of where people are projected. Like, again, Michigan State, their path looks a little bit easier. So just when you look at kind of where people would be theoretically projected right now, it does look like that we have one of the hardest last, 6 or 7 game stretches out there, maybe us and Michigan. And then, that would be my, does that leave the door open for Illinois or Michigan State to kind of sneak in? Because we're going to be basically playing, us and Michigan are going to be playing each other, 2 times to finish off. But, to answer a 3-game stretch, I think that, it's probably going to be that it has to be a 5-game stretch. I'm not answering the question. Illinois on to the rest of the way, that game home against Illinois on February 18th. It's right. The only, that's one of the hardest games Illinois is going to have to finish off their schedule. So that's a game you really could try and win at home. It's so tough to say it's in September. I know I said it like 5 times, but then, 2 road games, then home, Iowa, Michigan. I mean, I have a hard time pinpointing what a 3-game stretch would be, but as I look at it, I think that both Indiana and Michigan have pretty tough roads. Illinois and Michigan State don't, based on what we know now. But yeah, did us no favors, but it'll be a fun February. And you know what? If we're going to win the Big Ten, we're definitely going to earn it. That's for damn sure.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Well, Scott, I know you got to run.
Yep, sorry to have to bail, but thank you guys
tonight. And hey, no problem. Looking forward to the Crimson Cast content over the football season. So thanks, man. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, guys.
So Ryan, as we kind of circle back, I mean, the 3-game stretch that stood out to me, Scott alluded to it, was you come back off those couple road games at Michigan, at Northwestern, and then you've got Illinois at home, at Michigan State, at Purdue. Assuming even the early February games don't go terribly poorly and you take care of business at home, that 3-game stretch really becomes important, because assuming you're in the race at that point, that is a potential 3-game losing streak that I don't think individually, if you looked at those games and said you lost any one of those games, it would be shocking. And for a team that has had issues with letting things snowball from a record perspective down the stretch in a variety of recent seasons, that's probably the part that makes me the most worried. But is there a section of that really stands out to you that is maybe a make or break stretch there in the February / early March section?
No, Andy, we agree completely, which is, and longtime followers of this show know that doesn't happen all the time. But that's the stretch that stands out to me, is you play Illinois, who is supposed to be one of the better teams in the conference, home or away. They don't seem to care over the years. They have beaten Indiana at Indiana a number of times. But then at Michigan State, I don't care how good or bad that team is, it's always difficult to beat them at home, especially for Indiana. And then at Purdue, it's a rivalry game, can go either way. Even if Purdue's not good, even if Indiana's not good, whatever, those games tend to be battles because it's a rivalry game. And that's true in most sports. So that's a 3-game stretch where, as you said, wouldn't be shocking if you pulled those games out individually and they lost all 3. And that again, and then you play Iowa at home and then Michigan at home to finish the season. So it's that 3-game stretch leads into 2 games that could be awkward and difficult in their own right. But that's the stretch that stood out to me. Absolutely. It's the same one that you picked. I think, at Michigan and then at Northwestern, which tends to sometimes be an awkward place for Indiana to play. Obviously it's different teams, different coaching staffs, whatever. I mean, they lost last year, but that's because a bunch of guys were suspended. And then having to play Illinois at home, that's a weird stretch. But the Illinois at Michigan State at Purdue is, I think, that's 3 big ones right in a row. And if you had that in early January, you don't feel as bad about it, I think, because you're like, well, they can make up for it. There's no making up for it at that part of the season. And you got to make hay, as you said, early in the season so that you give yourself some leeway there.
Yeah. How do you view I think you touched on this a little bit earlier. But interesting that there's so many weekend home games in conference. And I kind of look at it. You think you can make an argument both ways. I think it was you had alluded to the Purdue game last year. Maybe that's just the thing with it being the Purdue game on a Tuesday night, get the students in there and things like that. Do you think that's a advantage though, where by the same token, you may have other fans who may not be able to make the trip as easily on a weeknight or things like that? I mean, where do you net out on that? Is it a net positive or a negative?
I tend to think the students are better on weeknights and the rest of the fans are better on weekends. But a lot of those are afternoon games too on weekends and not a night game. And night games do seem to have a bit more of a crazy crowd. I mean, having experienced it myself, Saturdays are, a more muted crowd, I think. Personally, in my experience, and we're talking not like event games, not like a Big Ten ACC Challenge or I know those are weeknight games too, but a regular non-conference game on a Saturday tends to have a little extra juice if it's a good team. But the regular mundane Big Ten games tend to be a little more subdued on a weekend, and so yeah, that is interesting and that is different. I mean, that said, if the team's good and competitive, I think that crowd gets up for it regardless of when it is. It has to do with the engagement level of the fans during the season. So I think the crowd will be fine if they're competitive. And I think that, they'll have that energy regardless. But I will say also, you want those Tuesday night crowds to be good, or those Tuesday, Wednesday night crowds to be good. Like one of them is they play Rutgers at home on a Tuesday. You're going to need the crowd in that game because it might be a letdown game coming after a Saturday Purdue game, and so maybe you want that crowd on a lesser game. Also, maybe going on the road on a weeknight somewhere else, the students don't show up. It's different than IU. Maybe the students don't show up as strong some nights on the weeknights. So I don't know. We'll see. I tend to think that it's more about the team than it is about, it's about how the team's doing versus, what it's typically like on a weeknight. So we'll see. I mean, that'll definitely be put to the test this year because there are not a lot of weeknight home games in the Big Ten.
Yep. All right. Well, we're going to take a quick break, albeit without music, with Jared not here, and we'll take a quick break, and then we'll come back and answer a handful of questions that we got from our community. So stick with us here on the Assembly Call. I'm just going to go on and assume that nobody's going to put any music on that over, but I did leave ample space in case someone was inclined to do so. So, yeah,
Jared will clean it up in post.
We can probably, Ari can do that. Who knows? We'll figure it out. Really only 3 questions because the other one I think he had put in here if Scott was going to be able to stay on. So I think we only got these 3. So we'll.
It's cool. We've done an hour already. So
we'll hit these. Yeah, we got pretty deep into the schedule. The other hard part about the schedule is, man, you just, for as much as you think who's going to be, I just think back to Wisconsin. Heading into last season, you would have thought, oh, that's a team you'd be happy to play with who they had lost, and everybody thinking they're going to take a step back, and then that doesn't really end up being how it is. So there's always a couple teams like that where you think I lucked out by getting to play this team twice, and perhaps that is not the case. So
and there's always one team that pops every year that's good that you're not expecting to be good, and I think there's always a team that disappoints. Hope that's not you, but so that there are games you're dreading that wind up being. But I mean, it was, then there are games where you're not expecting anything and you get a dogfight. So you don't know until you start playing the games.
Yep. Agreed. So, all right. Well, we'll hop back in here and answer these few questions, and we'll let everybody get back to their Thursday evening. So, all right. Welcome back to the Assembly Call. I'm Andy Bottoms here with Ryan Phillips, and it's now time for our mailbag. All questions, as usual, were submitted via our private IU basketball discussion community, which you can learn more about and join at assemblycall.com/community. So just a few questions this week. Did have one that was about specific to the schedule, which I think we hit earlier. But Ryan, the first one comes from Andrew. Does Trace earn season-ending All-American honors this season? Does any other Hoosier? Who, why, and what likelihood?
I would say yes for Trace. I don't know if it'll be first team, but I'm sure he will get all-American recognition. I think part of that is he'll come into the season with that kind of hype. And I think that tends to carry you. Rarely, I mean, it's very rare that a guy with no hype winds up on an All-America team unless he leads the nation in scoring or puts up enormous, puts up ridiculous. I don't think, and we've gone on record, I think we all think that Trace's numbers may actually go down a little this year while his efficiency numbers go way through the roof just because he's surrounded by better talent. But yes, I would likelihood, I'd go above 50% that it happens, that he's on one of the teams, especially given how he closed last season. I think that if he can carry that through, maybe round out his game a little bit, and there will be some pressure taken off him. So I don't think he'll be so worn down. It stretches the Big Ten season. I would say above 50%, he winds up on an All-America team. Any other Hoosiers? I don't think so. I think Xavier Johnson will get some Big Ten recognition. I think Race Thompson will also be in line for some Big Ten recognition. And you might get Jalen Hood-Schifino in a freshman of the year conversation. I don't know if that'll happen, but I think that he might be in discussion for the freshman teams. I don't know about All-American, but certainly in the Big Ten. So yeah, I think that's really what you're looking at. The usual suspects, the 3 guys you would expect, and Race Thompson too. So 4 guys you would expect to get some recognition in the mix.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you. I think it's historically, I would imagine it's pretty uncommon for a guy off the radar to start the season would kind of surpass a teammate who was already on the All-American
right watch list and stuff.
Radar, if you will, to do that. So that seems fairly unlikely. But yeah, I think Trace, particularly if IU ends up being a top 20, top 15 team throughout most of the season, they compete in the Big Ten, and he continues to be the focal point. I think he's the guy that's going to get the accolades. You've just got a lot of talented big guys coming back. It's one of those where probably if you force people to make All-American teams into teams that would actually you put on a floor together at the same time, probably this would be a weird year for it because you got so many big guys back with Timmy, with Trace, with Hunter Dickinson, all that. I think you'd probably have kind of an odd mix this time, but that's not usually how it works. And you can, if you want to throw 5 forwards on there or 5 big guys, like people are able to do that. So, but yeah, I think it's Trace or nobody would be my guess.
Yeah.
Jeffrey asks, will a conference finish outside the top 3 be considered a major disappointment this season? Kind of an interesting question to look at today in light of the schedule coming out. But what's your thoughts on that?
Are you asking me if it would be a disaster, Andy? Is that the?
I'm not. Nor is Jeffrey. That is not a word that he used. Not a word to be tossed around willy nilly to just throw out.
So my thing every year is finishing the top 4, and so I'll stretch it to 4 instead of 3 because I think that top quadrant is what you aim for every year. Top 4, as I've always said about this, what you want to do with a program like IU is consistently finish in the top 4 and it consistently reach the Sweet 16. And then there's the odd year where you do better than that. But that should be your goal every year. It's sort of like if you're a college football team, your goal should be to win your conference. Whether or not you get into now you're going to automatically be getting into the college football playoff in the future. But like control what you can control, which is you can control a top 4 finish and you can control getting out of the first weekend of the tournament. Those are the 2 things. Other than that, it's going to be a lot of luck of the draw, a lot of schedule stuff, and depending on injuries and all of that stuff. So I would say outside the top 4 this year, yes, that would be a disappointing season, I believe. Now it's one thing if you're tied record-wise for 4th and with a couple other teams and you wind up 6th as a result or something like that. I mean, there's some leeway there. But I think you need to be in the mix at the top of the conference. And usually the top 4 is in the mix at the top of the conference. With this roster, with everyone coming back, yes, it would be a disappointment to be outside of that top group, in my opinion. And it would be a disappointment to not make it to the Sweet 16 and potentially beyond.
Yeah, I think it's a tough question because I think normally you would look at, I guess I'm going to assume a couple things here. I'm going to assume that most publications or people making predictions are going to put IU as a preseason favorite. At least if you aggregated those up, you may see different things here and there from different places. But I think if you took all those on average and figured out where the Big Ten teams were, I think on balance, IU is going to be the favorite. And I think if you look at it that way, I think most of the time you would say, hey, a team that is a favorite in a league probably shouldn't finish outside of the top 3. Now, the question you end up asking yourself is IU the favorite because they're really the best or because they're the team that the most about the guys who are coming back? And that's where it's a little bit harder to tell. You can look up and down, and we've talked about this
almost like by default. Yeah.
It's kind of like, well, I know this guy played well at the end of the season, seem like they maybe have the fewest question marks. Now, people who follow the program closely may disagree in terms of what the question marks really are. But if you lay them out against some of the other Big Ten teams, I think they do have in some ways fewer question marks. So I don't know that it would be a massive disappointment. And especially when you look at what the schedule is, I think a lot of that goes into how you get there. If you start out really strong and kind of fade down the stretch, I think that does become a disappointment because you feel like you've got a largely veteran team who should be able to not go into these long slumps at the end of the season. If you're just kind of slugging it out and the Big Ten is very balanced and you end up 4th or 5th, but 2 games out of first place, I don't know that I don't know that feels terrible. So a long answer for saying I'm not sure, I guess, but I think you could see it both ways. I think it's a little bit of how it materializes, but I think a lot of that comes from being the projected favorite for whatever it's worth. I did see in the chat, Quang had asked if I had an early bracketology. This is too early for me. I'll leave that to Lenardi and Palm, who get paid to do that stuff, that they can, if they want to hypothesize about who's going to be there. I'll leave that to them, and I'll usually do one right before the season starts. But I am starting to at least consume some preview content, so we're at least getting close to thinking about it. And then last question from Brian: what game is the gang going to? Lots of options. So I know Ryan touched on this earlier, planted his flag on the Purdue game. I will go through what the other options could be. And again, as we talked about it before, it is almost always the preference is a Saturday game at home. So our options, if you use those as the and I'm not throwing in the December game. So if you look starting in January, first Saturday home game is against Wisconsin on January 14th. There's also 2 weeks after that, Saturday, January 28th versus Ohio State at home. Then a week later, you get that Purdue game that Ryan referenced. And then the final Saturday home game is against Illinois on February 18th. So really not a bad option in the bunch. I mean, we could all, I think I'm not going to be in the business anymore of assuming that Wisconsin is going to take a dramatic step back and that game would be the most winnable of the group. But, choices of Wisconsin, Ohio State, Purdue, and Illinois suggest that no matter what, it'll probably be a pretty good game. But I guess, Ryan, you've planted your flag on the first one. So what would your second choice be?
I think the Illinois game, I think. And you have to remember that January for me is hard with the NFL because of the NFL playoffs and I have to work. And so it's hard to take those days off of work for me. I know this isn't built solely around me. We've got three other co-hosts, so I try and be as accommodating as possible. I would say we're also not competing with the NFL when we do it on a weekend where there isn't playoff football. And so anybody who's a fan of those teams that are participating can take it off. Like, we do not want to do it around the Super Bowl. Like, we would never do that just because people want to watch the Super Bowl or build their weekend around the Super Bowl. So I would say the 4th of February and the 18th of February are the most likely if people are looking to plan out. You're right. Wisconsin seems to be the most winnable of those games. I don't know what Ohio State's going to look like this year, but they tend to be a dogfight every time. That's conference championship weekend for me. So that's a difficult one, the Ohio State one. But I would say if I had to do them in order, I would say Purdue game, just because A, it's Purdue, B, it's a great week for it schedule wise, C, I love that doing that game. 2 would be the Illinois game on the 18th of February. 3 would be Wisconsin on the 14th. And last would be the Ohio State weekend. As far as feasibility, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I think quality of game, I think probably your top 2 would be the same. And then maybe you flip the other 2, at least based on what you think it's going to be. Ohio State's got a lot of new guys. So a lot of question marks there. And then Wisconsin's certainly looking to replace a lot of firepower as well. So I think Ohio State projected by most to be maybe a fringe top 25 team. So from a quality of game standpoint, that one probably comes in 3rd for me. But interesting.
Breaking
now,
news.
Ari is chipping in with if the 18th, you then have IU Purdue women the day after. So now if you want to do a weekend double of games, perhaps that adds a new wrinkle that I am ill prepared to discuss.
I have breaking news. Coach Stonsoni has chimed in with his selection. He would like to go to the Purdue game. So, I mean, that's a powerful vote right there in favor of my choice of the Purdue game. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure I insist on counting that vote double when the 4 of us sit down to vote. So
I like that you're insisting that you're like the only one who would think it would be a good idea to come to the Purdue game. That somehow,
you guys usually just disagree with me.
Somehow you've broken intellectual ground by saying, "Man, it'd be really cool to come to the IU Purdue game." It's like, yes, of course it would. There's no reason to think otherwise.
Well, no, you guys just always disagree with me out of spite. So I figured, I got to push this really, really hard.
My challenge is I never know what I have going on from
I know.
from a
It's
kid
a bummer.
perspective, and we
We
can't
got-
really wait on that because it takes so long to
Yeah.
do that. So like I said,
We got
I
lucky
think
last year. You guys,
we ended up getting like snowed out at our game here, or iced out or something. So it worked out all right, other than the result of the game, of course. But
yeah, no, it was great that you guys got to come last year, last minute. It was awesome.
yeah,
It worked out.
so we'll do our best to get it planned early so that we can let people know and you can make accommodations. We'll work on that, and obviously we'll want to try to reserve presumably Switchyard, but some venue of some kind for the actual meetup. So all that will be taken into account, and we'll let everybody know as soon as possible so we can all look ahead to it and plan accordingly. But with that, that'll do it for this week's episode of the Assembly Call. If you want to see us do the show live, join us at assemblycall.com on Thursday nights for the live broadcast of our Assembly Call radio recording. Thanks to Bob Thompson for producing our music, and thanks to John Ringer of rigdesign.com for designing our logos. And thank you for listening. We'll talk to you not on Saturday from Switchyards. This run sheet is already clearly prepping for the meetup. But we'll talk to you next Thursday unless something breaks. And we will see you then. Until then, keep your elbows in and your eyes on the rim, and go Hoosiers. All right. Well, everybody, thanks. We appreciate you coming out this evening. Coach is booking hotel rooms. He's getting everything planned out. So
I may go ahead and book a
be good.
couple as well, just in case.
I was going to say, yeah, you may be wise before any of them wise up to what the schedule is going to be and start jacking the rates up to do that. So anyway,
yeah, we
right,
we decided very late last year, everybody. I mean, it was so great that everybody could make it, but we decided I remember last year, it was like, we decided in like late November or something, or December when to do it. So it's great if we could get it sorted out just for everybody early.
Yeah, it does help that it's kind of back to a little more normal Big Ten schedule. I know there was a couple years there where it was just hard to even just find weekend games.
I think last year there was only one Saturday.
I feel like they've stepped it. Yeah, I feel like they've stepped. I mean, it's certainly from the IU schedule, it looks like they've stepped completely away from, trying to have games on different days. It feels a little bit more traditional in terms of when the games are. I don't know if that happens to. I don't know if that's just an IU thing. I sincerely doubt it. That maybe they've stepped away from doing some of the kind of odd game days and different things like that. But either way, that helps us. Certainly, the inventory of games to pick from for us is far greater this year than it has been in years past. So hopefully that helps everything out as well. So, all right, awesome.
All right,
well,
guys.
I'm assuming Jared is somewhere. I did text him that he could turn this off because I am not logged into the Assembly Call account and cannot turn it off. So this will either go on in perpetuity with either no one on camera, or we'll figure it out after that. So at any rate,
bye everybody.
We'll talk to everybody next week. Thanks for joining us, and enjoy your weekend, and we'll talk soon. Thanks.
Later, guys.